Game of Thrones is not history. It is alt history, not a reconstruction of a known past. It is historically literate, without ever claiming to be history. And yet there are some clear and obvious historical parallels, and one that George R.R. Martin has spoken of is between Tywin Lannister and King Edward I. Like Tywin Lannister, Edward Longshanks was the ultimate medieval warlord, unafraid to inflict any misery when pursuing a war, and using relatives in power games that would further his goal. And yet his cruelty always had a purpose, and though he used torture and murder to further his aims, drove bankers to extinction, and caused misery for the small folk of Wales and Scotland, his violence was never mindless. Indeed, he reprimanded those around him who committed atrocities for their own sake. In the television series, Tywin is played by English actor Charles Dance, who specialises in portraying cold-hearted aristocratic types lacking in sympathy for the lower classes. King Edward was certainly in that bracket, and is probably best known in the popular imagination as the villain of the Mel Gibson historical epic Braveheart. In reality, both Edward and his Scottish enemy Robert the Bruce were French speakers, and the film is not exactly pedantic in its accuracy. But the king was every bit as brutal as it makes out. Both Tywin and Edward were very tall. Edward was 6'3", a giant for a time when the average man was no more than 5'7", which is how he got the nickname Longshanks. He was one of the finest swordsmen of the age, and the earliest Robin Hood stories have him in single combat with the outlaw. Such was his renown. Historian Michael Prestwich argued that his long arms gave him an advantage as a swordsman, long thighs one as a horseman. In youth his curly hair was blonde, in maturity it darkened, and in old age it turned white. His speech, despite a lisp, was said to be persuasive. The king was described as having a sinking or dip between the chin and underlip, which was very conspicuous. Both the lips were prominent, the nose short as if shrunk. There was an unusual fall or cavity on that part of the bridge of the nose which separates the orbits of the eyes. He inherited the drooping eyelid of his weak father King Henry III, although not his temperament. Quite the opposite, for Edward was famous for his ruthlessness. As a young man, he ordered his attendants to put out the eyes and cut the ears of an adolescent who angered him. Archbishop Corbridge of York had an interview with the king and was so shaken that afterwards he took to his bed and died. In another famous story attached to Edward, a cleric dropped dead with fear upon approaching the king with a request for lower taxation.